Hi, welcome back to Icelandic for Foreigners. In this video, we are going to continue learning about strong verbs, particularly about the vowel shift that happens in the past tense. You may remember from my first video in the series that when we look a verb up in the dictionary, it will give us verb stems. Particularly, we learned with regards to the past tense that these two forms right here helped us build the past tense and know how the verbs conjugated in the past tense. So we learned that the first one there is the jeg form, jeg bøið, past tense of að bjóða. And we used that form to build the left side of the chart, þú bauðst, hann, hún, það bauð. Then we learned that the other form gave us the þeir, þær, þau form, buðu, and we used that to build up the other side of the chart. So in this video, we're going to be going over why these past tense forms look so strange, and also learn some patterns so that we don't have to memorize 4 verb stems for every single Icelandic strong verb. There are a lot of patterns that can give us an idea of how a verb conjugates in the past tense. However, I do need to make a note about this, that strong verbs in general are very unpredictable, especially in the past tense. So although we can look at some patterns, there will always be exceptions. The only way to be absolutely sure of a strong verb's conjugation is to look it up on bin or Ask an Icelander. All right, so let's look at some of the most common vowel shifts, and we're going to look at each of these one at a time. And basically what this list is showing us is what the vowel in the infinitive changes to in the past tense for the 2 past tense forms. And then once we look at all of these different changes, we'll look at some other past tense features at the end. Now, these first 2 vowel shifts that we're going to look at are very predictable. You can almost be guaranteed that if it's a strong verb, it will conjugate in this way in the past. These other ones, however, are fairly unpredictable. And so we can look at examples of verbs where these shifts happen, but it won't be true for all verbs. All right, so let's look at the first one. This is when we have a yo or a u in the infinitive, and it turns into an ö and an u in the past tense. The ö is referring to the jeg form, and the u is referring to the þeir, þær, þau form. So the example that we've looked at a lot is að bjóða, to invite. We have ég bauð in the past tense, and þeir, þær, þau buðu. And those are the 2 forms that we need to build the entire past tense. The verb krjúpa, which means to kneel, has an identical past tense, kraup and krupu. The same with rjúfa, which means to tear. We have rauv and ruvu. This is really a pretty small class of Icelandic verbs that has a yo or a u in the infinitive, but when you see it, you know that it will conjugate this way. Let's move on to the next vowel shift, where e in the infinitive becomes a and e in the past tense. A verb that we've already looked at in previous videos is að bíta, to bite, which becomes ég beit and þeir, þær, þau bitu. Bíða follows the exact same pattern. In the past tense, ég beið, þeir, þær, þau biðu. Same with skína, the exact same forms in the past tense, and grípa, with similar forms in the past tense. So whenever you see that e in the infinitive, if it's a strong verb, then you can be sure that it's going to conjugate this way in the past. Let's move on to the next vowel shift, which can either be an or e, turning into an a or an au. Like I said, now we're getting into the categories that aren't quite as firm, which means there will be more exceptions to them. But in this category, we have bera, which becomes bar and báru in the past tense, which is similar to lesa, to read, becomes las and lásu. Gefa becomes gaf and gáfu. Sofa becomes svav and sváfu. Biðja becomes bað and báðu. And geta becomes gat and gátu. So you can see the similarity in the past tense between all these verbs. But like I said, it doesn't hold true for all verbs. For example, að koma, to come, has the past tense kom and komu. So that one doesn't follow this pattern. There are many strong verbs that don't follow this pattern. Another one that you might see is a, au, and becoming o and o in the past tense. Like taka becomes tók and tóku. Fara, which means to go, becomes fór and fóru. Slá becomes slow and slóu. Draga becomes dró and dróu. and fela becomes fol and folu. The next one is when a, or au can become ye and ye, or and in the past tense. So fatla becomes fjall and fjallu. Lauta becomes liet and lietu. Fá becomes fjekk and fengu. This is a very abnormal one. Same with ganga becomes gekk and gengu. So for verbs like this, it's really hard to just guess by looking at the infinitive exactly what it will be in the past tense, but at least there are some patterns in the vowel shifts that happen. Certain verbs like fá and ganga, you'll just have to memorize the past tense. But other verbs, you can learn some patterns that will just be helpful. The next vowel shift is when and I can become a and u in the past tense. Like vinna, to work, becomes vann and unnu, and bresta becomes brast and brustu. So that covers the vowel shifts that we're going to look at in this video. Now I'd like to talk about strong verbs that have DTD endings. When you look these verbs up in the dictionary, it won't give you two past tense forms, it'll only give you one, because you just use the regular DTD past tense endings for all of the forms. So here is a list of some of the verbs that look like this in the past tense. Now note that the present tense form of these verbs does not look like a DTD verb. It looks like a strong verb in the present tense. But then in the past tense, we have a DTD ending. And usually there's a vowel shift into an A as well. So verja becomes varði in the past tense. Kveðja becomes kvatti. Krefja becomes krafði. Vekja becomes vakti. Lemja becomes lamti. Kvetja becomes kvatti, and telja becomes talti. Now, if you look at all the infinitives on the far left side, you'll notice that all of them have this form, where they have an E and then a consonant, and then a J and an A. That'll clue you in that it has this DTD ending in the past tense. There are, however, some other strong verbs that don't have this exact form that still take a DTD in the past tense. Let's look at some of those, like að þurfa has a very irregular present tense, and in the past tense takes a DTD ending, þurfti. Vilja becomes vilti. Mega becomes mátti. And here we just see a complete change in form in the past tense from the infinitive. Same with að eiga becomes átti. Vita becomes vissi, which isn't a regular DTD ending, but it behaves kind of like a DTD ending. And hafa becomes hafði. The last thing I'd like to talk about that you often see in the past tense forms is what's called V drop, which is where either one or both of the past tense forms doesn't have a V that is in the infinitive. For example, að vinna, to work, becomes vann and unnu. So you see that the V drops in the þeir, þær, þau form. Or vaxa becomes óks and óksu. And vinta becomes vat and undu. And last, verða becomes varð and urðu. So always be on your guard that if there is a V in the infinitive and it's a strong verb, it might have a V drop in the past tense. All right, I know that was a lot to take in for vowels in the past tense. Really, you can just learn patterns that will make it a little bit easier to memorize some of these past tense verbs. That way you don't have to memorize separate forms for every single verb you learn, which can be very time consuming and take a lot of brain power. So I hope this was helpful to teach you some of the patterns. Let me know if you have any questions or comments, and stay posted for more. Bless, bless.